Hello and welcome to the Copwatch Media bonus episode podcast. I'm Vivi. I use they, them pronouns. These are my lovely friends. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. You want to go first?
Yeah. My name is Kyrie McDaniel. Pronouns are they, them.
Hi, my name is Anise, and my pronouns are she, they.
So we're here today to talk about community safety. We've all been doing community safety at protests for the past couple of years, and we met at the Stonewall protests. Do you want to tell everybody what the Stonewall protests were about?
Sure. So with the 2020 uprising that happened after George Floyd was murdered by the state, there was a response in New York City in solidarity with Minneapolis. And while there was a lot of focus on police brutality and racism and anti-Blackness kind of roped up into all of it, there were some gaps when it came to intersectionality. So a lot of Black queer folks and Black femme folks were being just left out of the narrative. There were Black trans people who were also being murdered by the state, so either by police forces or systemic racism. So the Stonewall protests were born out of two Black trans women, Joella and Queen Jean, coming together to uplift the different types of violence that intersect, that impact our Black trans community members and neighbors.
Yeah, so we met there doing community safety. That entails like kind of keeping your head on a swivel throughout a podcast. Like your quote unquote job would be to keep all of the community members within the protest safe. Kyrie, you want to tell us what you did on safety?
Yeah.
At some other protests?
So I played the role of being a floater, and essentially a floater is someone that goes from the back of the protest or the front of the protest, and that kind of like interchanges. But from throughout most of the protests, I usually would stay in the middle, just to like keep an eye of the crowd, try to see if there's like any anomalies, like any like odd behavior from someone, or undercover, or like just any like odd behavior. But usually it was me, going to the front of the protests, trying to keep that balance of communication from the front and the back, because for a lot of the protests, like it was a lot of people, so we had like walkie-talkies and to use for like communication, but like that didn't always work. So like having like me being a floater definitely helped with that level of communication.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it was super, super helpful because kind of what Kyrie pointed out, there's sort of this perimeter around a direct action, right? So you've got your organizers in the front, oftentimes leading the chants, uplifting the demands. You've got your protesters, or the people lending people mass and, kind of uplifting those messages. And then you have folks in kind of different pockets keeping eyes out. So like you said, head on a swivel, like you said, looking for anything that seemed kind of odd or off. So for me, I actually started on foot in the middle of the protest, and then saw that there was support needed for those folks who were on bicycles who would kind of go ahead of the march and block off traffic. So I spent some time up there. It was a particular type of chaotic energy, and I saw that not a lot of folks wanted to be at the very back of the march. And the back of the march is this like awkward combination of sort of first line of defense, and if we go down, the likelihood of violence is really high. So whether that's, cars driving through us, or cops kind of escalating towards people's backs so they can't even see them. And that's actually how I met you, and especially that fateful New Year's Eve where we teamed up in the back.
Maybe the worst New Year's of my life.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I love the Stonewall protests. It was just a very stressful time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I did the back line as well. My main focus was definitely cars behind us. I had seen and experienced a lot of like car violence at protests, so that was a big concern for me. And then we also had sometimes, somebody had to stop, tie their shoe, or like grab something from a deli. So when people fall behind, we like to look out for them, even if they like if they're still staying with the march, we like to look out for them, or even if they're leaving, maybe make sure they have a safe way of getting home with a buddy. So typically we had bikes in the back line with us, and then a few people on foot who could kind of come in and out of like that main backline role of watching out for cars or the cops that are following us. Yeah.
Do you remember how many cops used to follow us on average?
Oh, I couldn't fucking count. I mean, on foot, it depended on the season, because once they got cold, they would be in their cars. But we had to have had like at least 8 like cars total, counting like the vans with us, especially when SRG was coming along. But we've had different ones. We've had like between like 10 and 50 on foot, SRG on their little bikes with their weird little football uniforms. Yeah, it's been totally fucked. One particularly fucked night that I wanted to talk about was April 29th. It was a Stonewall protest. We have a clip from that.
So really quickly, Vivi, you mentioned the SRG. Do you remember if they were following us at this particular action?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so for folks who might not be as familiar with the SRG, fortunately, they're the Strategic Response Group. They're an anti-terrorism unit that the NYPD has been deploying, at direct actions. They're the ones who have been enacting a lot of the sweeps of houseless encampments. They are a particularly brutal pocket of NYPD that was born out of the xenophobia after 9/11. So a lot of the terror that Muslim communities and South Asian communities and similar communities experienced. So this particular clip, it was April, so the weather was kind of back and forth, as happens in New York City. It was with the Stonewall protests. We were in Brooklyn. One of the really beautiful parts about the Stonewall protests is we used to hold intersections and have a ball, very much rooted in Black queer culture. I would definitely recommend watching Paris is Burning. I know it was really helpful context for me. And you can see in the clip, we kind of have this, perimeter of bicycles and just everyday people standing, kind of blocking the intersection. So as folks are dancing, participating in the ball, we don't have to worry about them being hit or run over. So I was allegedly there, allegedly. I may or may not allegedly be the person with like blonde or light blonde hair, kind of just frustratingly pointing my finger. So basically what's happening is we always offered cars support. So if there ever was a car who came through who was in an emergency or needed to get somewhere, we would help redirect traffic. Part of that is some of the neighborhoods we would have these protests in, the drivers would be Black folks or Latine folks or BIPOC folks. And because, to your point, we have so many violent cops behind us, if they get stuck there too, now everyone's risk raises or everyone's risk goes up.
Yeah.
So it was going pretty fine. We had cars coming. You can see in the clip we're kind of redirecting them. And there was one particular car that, was very insistent on wanting to drive straight forward.
And this happens like all the
time.
All the fucking time.
All the time. And it's really wild to me that people can be in this whole vehicle that weighs tons and tons, see a group of folks on foot, and have any other response than curiosity. Because, like, the damage and violence you can do as a driver versus just rerouting is just infinite.
Yeah.
So, this is where some of that intersectionality I was mentioning as to why the Stonewall protests even kicked off. And intersectionality is a term coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. As this car was getting a little bit more heated, a little bit more escalated, this flock of men walked over. It turns out, after kind of piecing together different pieces of information, that the car was in support of us. They had some energy. They definitely wanted to get on the way home. You can see that it's raining. But they were in support of us. But as, these men who were also part of the protests and understandably expressing anger, rage, frustration, a want for a better society, brought that energy towards the car, the driver started kind of escalating as well in response.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, this was always a really powerful reminder of, like, when we're trying to de-escalate a conflict or de-escalate something that could be violent or harmful, just fighting fire with fire doesn't always get us to that goal.
Yeah. And, like, it reminds me of something that we run into a lot on the ground or, like, at a protest or direct action, which is, like, some people, I think there's nothing wrong in expressing anger and, like, I guess mainly anger at a protest. Like, we're there because we're mad because, like, shit's fucked. Cops are killing people. But sometimes people come and they want to use that anger or use other people's anger to, like, fuel their own vision of themselves as, like, a protector and, like, a savior in a very, like, masculine, like, macho way. Because it's, like, it's sexy to be, like, a protector and to be able to, like, step in and be like, I'm gonna deal with this car because I'm a big dude. Like,
yeah,
it's just not necessary.
It's
sometimes,
not at
and it's, like, it's harmful sometimes when we're trying to, like, calmly get things going, because, like, the reality is, like, we're pretty good at it. Like, not to fucking, but like, none of us are particularly physically intimidating. I weigh 80 fucking pounds for anybody watching.
So small.
Yeah. So, like, nothing about me is physically intimidating, but, like, I've managed to de-escalate things by, like, either using, like, that, my being tiny to my advantage, or just by, like, bringing calm energy somewhere where it's needed. And this, like, heightened, like, sort of, like, fight response, although it is, like, a valuable survival tactic in many situations, like, in terms of trying to de-escalate something and prevent something bad from happening, it's, like, often not all that helpful.
Yeah. And I think, like, what really comes up for me, an activist and organizer that I really respect, their name is Colin Mendoza, and he always says that safety is cultivated and security is enforced. And that's what was so frustrating about this moment, is, like, all of these guys wanted to enforce, you, the driver, are going to do what we tell you to do. And if there had been more kind of cultivation and co-creation, the driver was already on our side. And you can see in the clip, like, I'm still directing the driver to where they need to go. All of these men are ignoring me, like, tapping into that kind of saviorship model that oftentimes men are taught. So it's not even from a place of maliciousness. It's just very ingrained. And it's not always helpful or needed. And it, like, it kind of speaks to, like, why this particular protest was pulled together to begin with. And also the roles we play in everyday safety. So earlier this week, myself and like 3 men who were all pretty large people went to a bar, and the security guards there are cops, right? So technically they weren't, on their NYPD job, but they still had their badges on them. They walked in with a violent attitude. And what got us safely out of a, close, like a pseudo false imprisonment situation with them was actually all of us staying very, very calm and not continuing to kind of escalate further and further up. And that's what kept us safe.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, ultimately, we redirected the car, but then the next pocket of protest safety folks that the car was around, the driver was so frustrated and so disappointed. He wanted nothing to do with us. Like now he's feeling as if what started off as a moment of solidarity turned into this moment of unnecessary conflict and tension.
Yeah.
Which is dangerous for him because he's turning back to where the strategic response group, this anti-terrorism unit that follows us while we're on bicycles and feet. Like,
yeah.
I carry like a Quran in my backpack. Oh, very scary. Like now his life is also kind of in more danger because he has to drive past them.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, overall not helpful. Yeah, and we had a few times where like we could also see cops kind of doing the same thing and then getting like shamed by protesters, which like kind of worked. Like I was thinking about that one night near NYU that you were at, Kyrie. I remember like someone was getting arrested, dropped their phone and like asked, just around like my phone, can someone get my phone? And I like tried to grab the phone and then got like promptly tackled. And I heard like from somewhere someone yelling like, "What are you doing?" That person was just trying to grab the phone. And I turn around and like sitting above me is just a cop who's like in full riot gear, looking so like horrified with himself. And it's like, yeah, you reacted in a really ridiculous way and like so overzealously, and like I'm just trying to pick up a fucking phone. Like this dude was just trying to support, or like yeah.
I definitely think it's a lack of mindfulness.
Yeah.
Especially with this video.
Yeah.
Because like to your point, like as soon as a situation gets spicy, men usually tend to try to like jump in to. It's not coming from like a place of being malicious, but it's like they're trying to de-escalate, but they're not being mindful of the fact of like when there's like so many guys, circling the vehicle, like that's not helpful. And then also like just I think it plays back into misogyny as well.
And even with that, like putting all of that aside, everyone in this video is an everyday person. Like some of them are friends of mine, some of them are siblings of other people or children or part of chosen families. Like we're just everyday people. And I feel like folks forget that, or it doesn't click for them because they'll watch a clip like this, they'll take it out of context. It's allegedly me, other folks allegedly with bicycles, allegedly, just doing what we can to create that moment of pause so people's demands can be uplifted. And the number of times that we've redirected traffic so ambulances can come through, we've even had cops intentionally have ambulances run a fake emergency to disrupt our protest, and we still let the ambulance through because it's not worth the risk. So when I get a little bit irritated about this because I had a childhood friend's mom complain to me about, well, you all are stopping traffic and that's so disruptive, and what about people just trying to get home who might support your cause, or maybe they don't, why are you making it their problem? But frankly, this is one, everyone's problem, and two, like you see, like we collaborate with community to keep each other safe. Like I don't need someone with a life-ending gun, like a potentially life-ending taser and other forms of violence and weapons on them in a crappy polyester uniform, right?
And
running
ugly.
And usually extremely ugly. Like being a cop is not flattering, does not get you laid. Like we don't need those folks to do pretty much anything, right? Because they show up as traffic cops. Like it's been less than I think 2 weeks at this point since I saw a traffic cop escalate to 100 out of nowhere just because they were xenophobic and racist as shit. So it's, even with a clip like this, as frustrating as it is to see kind of men sort of overstep and speak on behalf of women or femme folks or queer folks, we still don't need cops.
Yeah.
Still friends with all these guys.
Yeah.
We gave the feedback. We figured it out.
Yeah.
I might have been allegedly arrested at the same action later, allegedly, you know, but those were the same folks who showed up for jail support.
Yeah.
After I was released from the cage that the cops kidnapped and put me into. So.
Yeah. And I think that's like part of the point of like why I even wanted to do this podcast, is like none of us had formal training to do community safety. Like I literally just like had a friend who was doing backline, started walking with him because I didn't have anyone else to talk to, and then ended up like getting better at it and learning it, and then being able to like apply those skills, yes, at protests, but also like to me what's been really valuable is like in like quote unquote real life, like outside of like actions of any kind. So I guess like my hope is that people will be able to learn from our experiences and like mistakes and successes without the trauma that has been like the past 2 years on the ground. But Kyrie, I know you had a couple clips lined up too. Do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Come on, walk.
So in this clip, I'm gonna talk to you about, you know, what happened. This was from October 6th, I want to say.
5th or 6th, something like that.
It's been from so long ago, but it was October 6th, 2020. And basically in this clip, it starts off like the angle is, it's kind of hard to picture what's happening at first because we're actually getting pushed by the cops. It's like around 5 or 6 of us, and they have us cornered in the area. And the cops actually declared this area to be a frozen zone, which a frozen zone is essentially anyone within this vicinity or space, they're liable to get arrested, which I think is a lot of bullshit. But, we were on the sidewalk. I think most of us were actually recording a few of our comrades that had got arrested like 10, 15 minutes ago, and we just happened to be in the space still. A lot of us were upset about how violently they were arrested. So then to this day, I can't understand why it took so many cops.
Yeah.
I want to say on estimate that there was maybe at least 50.
Yeah.
At least 50 cops.
They easily
on that block.
Like really easily.
In riot gear or their everyday uniforms?
Some of them had riot gear. There was a lot of higher ups. So like a lot of white shirts. Yeah. And there was also SRG, but they weren't on the bikes as well. So
yeah, they were just in their riot gear.
Yeah, there was also cops, you know, recording as well. Watching the video, even though it was from like 2 years ago, I still get shaken up.
Yeah, and like part of the work I do is with cop watching, going through footage and seeing what could be useful for people who are maybe pursuing legal action for some harm that has been caused by the police, or to be able to like publish a story about it. Going through these clips can like, I mean, half the time it's like a little bit hard to watch and like almost re-traumatizing, and then the other half of the time it's like I don't remember any of this because I just like totally blocked it out. Like you had mentioned not too long ago how like you really didn't remember specifics very well, and like I even just talking about the date, it's like the days on which this type of violence happened, like they fucking blend together because it's like one violent, you know, incident with police feels exactly the same as the one that happened last week and the one before that. And
it was definitely constant. Specifically in this clip, actually, two black film presenting people were violently harassed by the cops. So as we were getting pushed, one of our comrades actually got arrested. They happened to be on the side, but they were still pretty close to us. But the cops decided to pick them off. Yeah. And then as we were getting shoved out of the space, I happened to notice to the right of me that there was a black femme in an altercation with what I perceived was a undercover, you know, like just a typical Yankees Yankees hat, you know, Tim's. It was clearly a undercover. But like I overheard the situation, and he was trying to get her to get out of the space, and she refused, and then he proceeded to cuss her out before also shoving her. Assaulting
and that's
her.
one of the like really dangerous things about the undercover cops is they dress in, I mean, it's unfashionable, right? So they are trying to dress as if they are everyday community members, and recently they've been dressing as like Amazon employees or delivery workers to trick people in the subways and to harass and harm them. But they're also some of the first people to escalate, and then they'll leverage their badge, you know, their hidden badge, their weapon, their status as a cop to justify the arrest and then create a false narrative around it. You know, like I've seen people basically kidnapped by undercover cops feet away from me because maybe that particular community member didn't know that person was an undercover cop, got into a, you know, just a verbal tiff, right? Like we're New Yorkers, we say shitty shit all the time, you know. And then the second piece that you mentioned about them kind of trying to isolate a person and pick them off, we've seen so many examples of them utilizing that tactic where they'll target someone and then intentionally try and escalate. So in the clip, you can see there's one cop in particular already holding their baton, gripping it tightly amongst the other cops in riot gear. Everyone's, you know, like one of the protesters is literally just standing there with their arms out. Right? So they're already ready to start beating the shit out of people and get everyone on the NYPD up in that area too. And then they'll isolate someone that they see as being vulnerable or they can make an example out of, and then they'll brutally take them down. And it's all intentional, and they try and play it off as it's just the way it happened, but it's all extremely calculated. They calculate their violence and then they enact it time and time and time again.
It's good that you mentioned the isolation because all throughout that night, that's basically what they were doing. Trying to single out people, and like in the other clips, they, you know, like we'll show the people. You'll see, you know, like specifically the cops, they'll point to someone or like they'll specifically target them. Awful night.
That was a bad one. No, like with them like pointing someone out, it's also like they'll do so. It's funny because it's like sometimes they think they know what's going on. Like one time I had a bag full of, I think, walkies, and just walkies, and I handed it off to somebody who like there was already like they were being like the cops were brutalizing like some community members, and like I handed off just a bag full of walkies to this friend to like go look into that, see if I could like de-escalate or like stand in the way of them or something. And while I was doing that, they pointed out the friend of mine and like beat her unconscious like over a fucking bag of walkies that they couldn't do anything with. It's not like we had anything like illegal in there. So it's like they are like intentional and like, or I guess intentionally violent, but they're also like they don't fucking know what they're doing half the time, and like they are intentionally violent, and then they're unintentionally violent also, like the thing I was talking about where that one cop like tackled me and everyone was like, fuck are you doing? Like being taught violence all the time has like motivated them to both intentionally use it and then like in just like moments where like things are getting hot, just use it like senselessly all the time. That's like how they move. And you know, that kind of overlaps a little bit with the way that the dudes in the first clip we watched, like they're you know, patriarchy can also kind of instill that idea of like I need to respond with like violence and like bigness in order to like fix this situation, but like it didn't work for the dudes that were trying their best to be helpful and have since learned for the most part. And it doesn't fucking work for cops, and it never has worked for cops, and since it's like taught to them and like ingrained over and over again, it's like fucking you suck. And fuck the police. I don't know, that's my
something
point.
that comes up like every protest, right? I have seen it's so upsetting, especially being in the back line, right, where the cops who are walking behind us just waiting for something to happen that could justify them or they could use as a justifiable reason to be violent. They see people in pain because of the constant police brutality that they're experiencing. And it's both the like getting the living shit beaten out of you, it's the experiences of being kidnapped and put in a cage, it's the experiences of being patted down on your way to school, and they laugh. I have seen them laugh at folks demanding an end to police brutality. I've seen cops laugh at that demand time and time again, which I think is so telling. And the other part of it too is they'll try and justify the existence of a militarized police force, and they'll say, oh, we do all this good community service, you know, and then you ask them for examples and they're extremely surface level. But last time I checked, like, you didn't need a gun to help me safely cross the street, right? Like, you didn't need a gun to listen to me when I was having a mental health crisis, right?
Yeah.
You know, like, all of us are spending, you know, a good chunk of our day today just in conversation and community sharing information with each other. None of us, you know, like, we don't need guns and badges to do any of this.
Yeah.
And yet they are convinced that they need to. And every time you talk to them, they're like, oh, well, you know, what if the person that we're trying to find, what if they have a gun? And you reflect that back to them of like, so you have a gun on you. So you recognize it's scary when other people walk around with life-ending tools and the intention to end your life. And yet your entire institution that is grounded in that, right? That is grounded in enslaving people, whether that looked like, you know, like plantations and kind of how that played out over time, or the prison industrial complex right now, like, that is literally what your job is.
Yeah.
And yet you see it as somehow like, we're just really scared people chasing after those criminals. Like, what the hell is wrong with you?
Yeah. Yeah.
It definitely feels, to me, it feels like in a way that they even like dehumanize themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we see it in community safety too, where people like, again, kind of trying to seek that like sexy role of like the martyr or something like that. And like, I don't know, it's not sexy to get beat up by the police. Like, we know that from personal experience. So like if your goal is to go out there and like martyr yourself, like, you're not actually trying to achieve safety within community, you're just trying to achieve like recognition for trying to achieve safety in community, and that's not very helpful. And like, instead of thinking about like part of it is also like thinking about your own safety and like how that impacts you, how that impacts the people who care about you in the space, because you and I have also seen a lot of like people who care about us and want to take care of us could potentially put themselves in harm's way because they're trying to protect us. So it's like, okay, I want myself to be safe, I want my friends to be safe, like, Yeah, and it's stuff that like happens not just at protests, it happens at the bar, like you were talking about the other day, like, and that's where I'm thinking like this knowledge can be a little bit more transferable to situations that aren't like exclusively dealing with like SRG.
Yeah.
So you had another clip, right, that you wanted to go into?
Yeah. Yeah. So in this clip, that was from the same night. We were in the same spot, same people, and over here a commotion behind me. So then I look over. I'm still recording. I happen to see there was a woman also recording on the sidewalk, and a cop, turns around and he, points at her and says that she's arrested, or he says that he's gonna arrest her. And once I had saw that, like the cops had already named that this area is a frozen zone. I just saw someone get arrested for simply recording.
Yeah.
And what went through my mind at that moment was I need to get out of this situation as soon as possible, because if someone's going to get arrested just for recording, it's like they can pick any of us off.
Yeah.
They don't have to have a reason.
Yeah.
So that's what happens in that clip.
Yeah. And that's, I'm glad you thought that way, because like I was saying before, your own safety is very much a part of community safety. Like, thank God you don't have a martyr complex like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it also goes to show like how afraid the police are of accountability, right? As much as we've seen them be very fearful of being recorded and act on that fear, like arresting that woman, like they're also the first to turn on their body cams to try and prove that, someone else who incited the violence. It was someone else who wasn't walking around with a gun and a taser and a badge and making verbal threats, magically escalated. The cops had nothing to do with it. But I think it also shows how preventative cop watching and police watching can be, whether it's, more formal or even just, with your own personal phone.
Absolutely. And like my, experience with it, or I started cop watching maybe like a year ago or so. My experience with it has very much been like, I am cop watching to prevent things from happening, and I've unfortunately seen a couple other cop watchers come out, and it seems like their goal is to catch something happening, something horrible happening, and the reality and like to me the basis of cop watching is like the presence of the camera is preventative, because like I've seen it happen, and like again these are practices we can use in our everyday lives. Like one day I was on the bus and someone was getting arrested, and I had extra time so I could like come off the bus and like film the arrest and like watch the cops while they were like waiting for someone to transfer this person to whatever booking precinct. But as I was doing so, like they didn't realize I was filming at first, and like even the initial like footage I got, like you can see the times that they don't know I'm filming and they're being super violent, and then there's another time where they start to be violent again and I'm filming them, and like the commanding officer or whatever the fuck saw me, went up to them and told them to like cut it out basically. So it's like, that's not to say like, oh look at me, I did that. It's more to say like that was so doable, and like if more of us were able to do that, that would be like amazing, because sometimes I'm on my way to work and I'm in a fucking rush and like I see something happening and it's like I want to catch this but I could get fired. But if all of us like are able to practice that that like, oh, I have time to stop and make sure that this person makes it out of this scenario safely, then we don't have to constantly be worried about like, oh, I can't be the one right now. Yeah.
And that's actually one of the main reasons why I started protesting to begin with, is to not only like empower myself or like other comrades, but also the people that see us marching through the streets, especially when we go into like Harlem, or like when we went to Harlem or the Bronx, places that were like predominantly black and brown. I think them seeing us protesting for what we were protesting helped them in a way realize that they have the potential to speak up, because I think for a lot of people in our society, we're kind of limited in those spaces of like being able to, you know, embrace, you know, happiness or even, you know, like anger, or like just emotions in general. But like hearing someone tell you that you have the ability to be able to create change is it's moving.
Yeah.
And I think going back to like community, I think a lot of people are so dependent on the police because, one, the police claim that they're there for our protection and for safety, when time and time again they've proven that that's not the case. But I think the dependency really comes from not so much people liking the police. I mean, there's definitely a lot of people that love the police, but I think a lot of people depend on the police because they see them as a way of like presence. So like whenever you see like the cops like around a store, just hanging around, people may feel comfortable just because, you know, their presence being there, but in reality there's no need for them to be in that space to begin with. So like things like that.
And it kind of like, even that want for their presence is so rooted in some conscious or subconscious or unconscious understanding that the police are violent punishers. So there's like something ingrained in there about, hey, I'm assuming that people, you know, that their presence will bring peacefulness or safety, because on some level folks understand that if you even breathe the wrong way, a cop could murder you. So on some level, folks do understand that this is survivorship, right? It's not actual safety. And the cops are there just to enact punishment and violence. There's an Asian queer abolitionist. Her name is Dr. Kim Tran. And she wrote on her Twitter feed at one point, you know, it's such a thin line between it's not my responsibility and if not us, who? Right? I mean, even as we see Eric Adams deploy more and more police officers, deploy more and more undercover police officers in our subway stations to harass people, or in pods and groups throughout different neighborhoods, we all have something we can do, whether it's a quick filming to try and deter a cop from being violent or deter them from escalating even further, all the way through to kind of what you were bringing up of what are those underlying unmet needs in our communities, and getting the support there, getting, you know, those systems of and relationships of care in place or strengthening them, versus spending $11 billion on people who are so underskilled in communication and relationship building that they have to rely on a gun to just be around other people. Like, those are the kind of incompetent assholes we are trusting. What the fuck?
And that's the way they're training them, too. Like, you know, trust me, all cops are bastards. But, like, they're taught to be bastards sometimes. By the way they're trained and by the culture they spread to each other.
And I can also name when I first moved to New York. I'm not originally from New York, but when I first moved to New York 6 years ago, I moved to the Bronx. And I remember when I first moved to the Bronx, at the end of our block, we had a police bus, like a whole bus. and at the end of the night, the cops would leave like the lights and the siren, or not the siren, but the lights flashing. And I guarantee you 99% of the time, or just 99%, that like none of the people, were going to the cops, saying that they're, like happy that they were in the neighborhood. It was clearly there, like the cops were clearly there as a form of intimidation.
It happened last night in Chinatown. They showed up to a community event. These two cops, they were intentionally starting to patrol and walk through the event, even though we had those of us who were community members looking out for each other. Then they tried to make themselves relevant by showing that they were giving people directions, but giving them the wrong directions. Or folks would ask about the event and they'd be like, we don't know what's going on. Then why the fuck are you here? And then they intentionally were trying to kind of stir up trouble so they could arrest someone. And ultimately, they kick someone out of the space, harass them out of the space just because they had a shopping cart to kind of move their things around. And like, exactly what did that accomplish other than them coming in and being violent, being extremely rude to people? They were, like down talking to all of the Asian women there. Like, this is what our taxpayer dollars are paying for. They parked their car and had the lights continuously running, which is very triggering for a lot of people. That's what our taxpayer dollars are paying for. Like, it just boggles my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's like sad too, because when we are able to create the spaces where we're centering safety over like security, which like that's, I think, the language that like separates sort of what we're trying to accomplish from what cops are trying to accomplish. When we're able to do the safety end of it and like not involve any of the security end of it, we get beautiful things like the balls at Stonewall, where people get to like wear absolutely whatever they want, and it's gorgeous what they wear. Like, I remember like so many times seeing people in clothes that I'm like, I would have never even thought to have a jacket like that exist, but it's sick. It's sick, and I love it. And spaces where like I was able to feel a little bit more like open to explore my gender stuff, and I don't know, it's beautiful. And it's like that stuff is entirely achievable. It's just there is this like barrier in the way of like either like the ideology that security implies safety, which it doesn't. It just implies safety for like a very small group of people.
And most of us were strangers to each other at Stonewall protests during those balls, and yet we were still able to come together, have a safe space where folks could express themselves. Conflict happened, harm happened, we're humans, that's inevitable, but we didn't need to rely on violence. And I think we have a clip too of one of those balls so folks can get a sense of the joy of it and what we were up to, what we were celebrating and uplifting.
And it's great. I mean, definitely, watch Paris is Burning if you get the chance, so you can get an understanding of what it all means. But it's awesome. So anyway, thank you both for being here today. I really appreciate you. Is there anything you wanted to plug while you're here?
Thank you for allowing me to be on this.
I have a quote from Mariam Kabe I'd be happy to share if that's cool. So Miriam Kabe is an incredible abolitionist. She is the author behind We Do This Till We Free Us, so definitely recommend folks check that out. But a quote of hers that's really resonated with me is, "People like me who want to abolish prisons and police, however, have a vision of a different society built on cooperation instead of individualism, on mutual aid instead of self-preservation. What would the country look like if it had billions of extra dollars to spend on housing, food, and education for all? The change wouldn't happen immediately, but the protests show that many people are ready to embrace a different vision of safety and justice. When the streets calm and people suggest once again that we hire more Black police officers or create more civilian review boards, I hope that we remember all the times those efforts have failed." And it really sticks with me because so much of what we practice at the Stonewall protests in the midst of all that violence, with all of those threats around us, are the same skills we use every day to get to know one another, to build relationships, to build community. And we practice those small pockets of safety every day. That world is so possible, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Dennis, for giving us the platform. We're hopefully going to follow up with some more episodes about community safety for those who want to learn more about how they can practice it in everyday life. Yeah, thanks.